Listen up, Democrats. You are fake news. And lies and facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity. Embrace our diversity. Whenever we are down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly engagement broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor, and I'm here today with my co-host, Betsy Cunningham. If you would like to ask questions during the live stream broadcast, go to the YouTube chat window and type them in, and Betsy will relay them to us, and we will do our best to answer them. Today, we have two guests on our show. We have Patrick Starnes, who's been working on campaign finance reform and will give us an update. And then after that, we have an interview with Mark Gamba, candidate for House District CD5. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Very well, Larry. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. So in our conversation today, Mark will be joining us. But first off, we would love to have an update from you, Patrick, on what's happening with campaign finance reform and how much success you've been having in Salem.
Well, at the end of March 27th, Jeff Golden, Senator Golden's new committee, the Campaign Finance Committee in the Senate, passed a resolution to send the constitutional amendment to the voters in 2020. But since it's a constitutional amendment, it has to go to the Senate Rules Committee next. And that's where we're waiting for that to pass through the Rules Committee. And then it'll go to the Senate floor. I'm learning all these hoops. It's quite cumbersome to get something passed. Then it goes to the House Rules after it passes the Senate floor. And if it passes the House Rules Committee, it'll go to the House floor. And then at the end, it gets signed by the governor. So we're at the first step, first success. One of the things that the majority leader, Jenny Burdick, Senator Burdick, is the majority leader, and she's also the chair of the Senate Rules. She's required that they actually come up with some campaign limits, contribution limits, parallel to this resolution that amends the Constitution. Because we first needed the constitutional amendment, which would allow Oregon to have limits. We're one of 5 states that has no limits whatsoever. And this constitutional amendment, which will be on the ballot in 2020, then will allow these limits that she's requiring the committees to put together. So Jeff Golden has given her a draft of his idea, and it was a spectrum, from the $100 limit back in 2006 to what the governor liked was to match the federal limits, which Mayor Gamba can talk more about those federal limits. It's $2,600 per person, $5,000 per PAC per election. And I think where they're landing is somewhere in the middle, which is something I support, which is $1,000 per person limit per election. So it's something that's more affordable for regular folks. I mean, that's still, you have to budget $80 a month to donate $1,000 per person. That's $20 a week, So we're waiting for it to go to the Senate Rules Committee, which should be the middle of May. And then from there, it'll go to the Senate floor. So if anyone is listening that's from Washington County, which is where Jenny Burdick is from, we can put some pressure on her if you're from Washington County to keep this in the front burner and to keep this moving.
Yes, Senator Burdick is up for election in 2020, so that's certainly a motivator for her. And since she's majority leader, it should be anyone in the state should feel welcome to contact her because she's one of the few people that make decisions that affect everyone. So is the resolution actually contain language for the Constitution, or does that have to be written?
No, it does contain the new language that amends Article 2, Section 8, which is more of the mechanics of elections in Oregon rather than the free speech clause. So they're trying to amend the Constitution in a new and different way so it won't get thrown out of court. And they have great confidence that it'll pass. I've been pushing Senator Burdick to push through this resolution regardless of the limits, because the limits, if this resolution has to pass before the voters in 2020, regardless of what limits they add onto it. And then another part that's being added on that's important is some kind of transparency and full disclosure laws on the dark money. That's the independent expenditures outside of a candidate. So that's the third leg of the stool that we need campaign finance reform, constitutional amendment, the limits set, and then dark money brought out into the sunshine. We can't limit the independent expenditures or the dark money, but at least we can get it out into the sunshine.
It seems like a lot of hoops between now and success. But it still sounds like you're confident that it's going to be passed. So have you been having conversations with the House, and do you think it's going to be easier once it hits the House Rules Committee?
Yeah, the House Rules Committee Chair, Paul Holby from Eugene, is working directly with Senator Golden and Representative Rayfield, who's written some of the dark money language. So those three are working really closely. And Burdick has given me she's assured me that it is a priority for her to get that through the Rules Committee. The good thing, but it's also the bad thing, is the Rules Committees have no deadlines, where Senator Golden's committee had the deadline of April 9th, and he got that passed before that deadline. The Rules Committee, both in the House and the Senate, have no deadlines, and that's why sometimes things languish. We have some bigger fights coming up in Salem, the carbon fight, the funding for schools. My fear is that those kinds of bigger battles will suck all the air out of the room, and then campaign finance reform could be forgotten. And that's why I'm pushing really hard to get it passed early now.
Yeah. Do you have, what are the identifiers for the resolution? How can people look up the history?
It's called SJR 18. If you go, one of the greatest tools that Oregon has is this a website called OLIS. I recommend anyone to type that into their phone right now. OLIS is Oregon Legislative Information System. It can lead you to different bills. It can lead you to different committees. It can lead you to your own state representative or state senator and tell you which committees they're on. It's just a really great system, OLIS.
Do you have co-sponsors?
Yeah, it started with, the resolution started with Senator Haas from Beaverton on the Democratic side, and Senator Knopp from Bend, which is ironically where Bueller came from. He's the senator from Bend. And one of the quotes, if you look at some of the testimony from Senator Knopp, the Republican, he talks about, we've got to stop the billionaire bonanza. I just love that quote coming from Dr. Bueller's neighbor and fellow Republican. But I'll let Mayor Gamba talk more about the billionaire bonanza, because I know he's up against it there, that mega $1 million campaign.
Yeah.
It was 40 million, Mayor, in my governor's race. 20 million on each side. Yeah. So
it's gotten crazy. I don't think that the founding fathers assumed that we would make our choices for our elected officials based on how much money they could raise rather than what their policies were or their vision.
The freedom of the press was just a free mail of newspapers, not social media, not TV, not radio. Yeah, so we're quite far from the original intent.
Yeah. We're facing Kurt Schrader already has $2.5 million in the bank, and he's fundraising actively right now. I think only 3% of his funds have come from small donors. So the rest of it's either millionaires or corporations. And do
you know what percentage is timber money? Because I know he's represents a big timber district.
Yeah, I've seen that. that breakdown, and off the top of my head, I can't do it. I should be able to, shouldn't I?
I got numbers from a while back right here. So if you guys take a look at this, forestry and forest products, 2017-2018 take, because they don't have any numbers for current haul yet. The total was $109,000, $52,000 from individuals and $57,000 from packs, and that's according to Open Secrets. So
Yeah.
Thanks, John. That's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was very handy.
So Mayor Gamba, how does that legislation square with you? Do you think that's sufficient and will address our problem, or is it a start?
Well, I think it's a start. For starters, that won't affect my race, of course, just the Oregon state level races. But I think it's critical. A $40 million gubernatorial race in a state this size is insane. Mm-hmm. And you know, as a result, both candidates spent a lot of their time raising funds rather than getting out and talking to voters by necessity. So I think it's a good first step. I think I'd still love to see both the state and the whole country figure out how we get away from the dark money issue, the non-aligned PACs that are really, in a lot of ways, almost the bigger problem, because they're even less limited as to what they can say. So the lies are far more blatant coming from those groups.
Yeah, and we don't know where the money comes from. Like,
Right.
you may remember in the governor's race, Priority Oregon had that terrible ad with the mom reading the book to the kid about Kate Brown.
Yeah.
And to this day, we still don't know where that money came from. It could have even come from out of the country, you know. So we can't limit it because of Citizens United, but we can at least have it be more transparent and have it be more disclosures, even taglines at the end of an ad that say paid for by, and who the top 5 donors are. So these are the minimum things. And if you want to get active in changing the Citizens United, a lot of people already know this, but Move to Amend is one of the groups you can join that come to Salem and to Congress, and hopefully Congressman Gamba will be able to help with that. But the statewide group is called WOLFPAC, and it's a national group. But WOLFPAC is trying to have a constitutional amendment convention that's by the states. So it can happen from the state level on up to the federal level, or it can happen from Move to Amend down from the congressional level. So to reverse Citizens United.
That was a really interesting point that you made, Mark, and that even if this legislation passes in Oregon, it won't affect the 5 and hopefully 6 congressional House races and the 2 senatorial races. We have to do that at the federal level.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's got to be a top priority if we get, if we get a new president and a flip in the Senate, that's got to be a top, within the top 5 priorities of what the new Congress does, is to reverse Citizens United.
Yeah, that was my biggest disappointment with Obama, was that in his first 100 days, he should have dealt with campaign finance reform.
Yeah.
Because then we wouldn't have had the insurance companies dominating Obamacare the way they have.
Right. It's going to be hard to fix anything as long as everybody who's there is fearing for their careers because somebody's holding some sword over their head financially.
Yeah, checkbook. Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to OLIS, can people still submit comments on the Joint Resolution 18?
Yeah, they can. And when these hearings happen, you can follow them in live stream, and you can submit your comments before the hearing or during the hearing or after. They have a really great system of they have the agendas printed. They have the speakers that are going to speak if they signed up early. And so it's I recommend everyone check out OLIS because it's a really great system. And that's not just for campaign finance reform. when the carbon fight comes up with climate change, we need that and other issues that are really important to all of the progressives.
Yeah.
But like Mayor Gamba said, my feeling is strong that if we don't do this campaign finance reform first, we're going to have a watered down climate change bill. We're going to have a watered down healthcare reform. And, all these other reforms are not going to be really what we want until we get the big money out.
Yeah.
And the challenge with going down and testifying is that they can change the schedule at the last minute.
Yeah.
So do we? And so you think it's going to be like the second week in May?
That's roughly. And those House committee meetings are at a set time. I think it's 1:00 on Wednesdays. Some of the committees meet more than once a week. The campaign finance committee that Senator Golden chairs is every Wednesday at 3:00. And so that's why I only volunteer on Wednesdays to come to Salem. And I'm getting at the end. My goal was to meet all 90 members. And I've only got like 2 more senators to meet and a couple House reps. So we're getting close to having met all 90 members. And I'll tell you, speaking of the dialing for dollars, that's one thing that's common ground for both Republicans and Democrats, especially in the House, because they have to run every 2 years. And some of these races are getting upwards to $1 million for just a House seat that pays under 30 grand, and they only meet for a short time. So like Mayor Gamba said, they're spending the majority of their time dialing for dollars. And that's not really what they signed up for. Their background as a small business person or as a nurse, so they got interest in healthcare. Maybe they're like myself, who served 10 years on the school board, so they have concerns about education. So that's why they came to Salem for this part-time job, not to raise $1 million every 2 years.
And Patrick, what is the communication tool that you use to alert people when it's time to do things like testify? Do you have a process set up for that, or?
I have just a Starnes report that I put out occasionally. I try to do it every week. If people want to email me, they can. It's Patrick Starnes, all one word. It's STARNES @live.com. I'll add them to that list. Or you can call me directly. I have my cell phone. It's a personal cell phone. It's 541-580-9120. And you can text or call and leave a message. And I try to report to them because I would argue, or I just make this point, that the real battle hasn't really come up yet because the Senate floor vote hasn't come up yet. It's just getting through these committees, which have been very friendly. So that's been the easy part, actually. But meeting all 90 members, I believe strongly we have the votes for this resolution to pass. That's what I told the majority leader, that it's ready to pass regardless of the limits or regardless of the dark money. This is the low-hanging fruit. And then passing this through Salem and getting the governor's signature is the easy part, because then it goes to the ballot in 2020, and that's the really hard, because the money is going to come out of the woodwork, right? From both sides will be against this campaign finance resolution to amend the Constitution in 2020. So that's really going to be the heavy lifting. And it'll be right during Mayor Gamba's race for the Congress.
Yeah, just to play devil's advocate, I'm actually curious what you think about the dynamic if we were able to pass this and put some kind of limits on it, even if it is the federal limits, which now is up to 2,800.
Is it?
Yeah. You still then have a campaign that's going to have less money than the unlimited dark money that they could be going up against. So they have less money to sort of combat whatever message the dark money is putting out there. Have you thought about that dynamic, and are there solutions to the dark money issue besides just daylighting it?
Well, we can't limit it because Citizens United, but it's so crucial. Many states have limited and added taglines. They haven't limited it, but they've added more disclosure, which Oregon should do. I mean, in Connecticut, for example, they've even legislated how fast you can read the tagline at the end. So you can't do the thing. They've even legislated how fast. So it's a really slow, you have to read it carefully so people can follow who the big donors to these outside PACs are. So, yeah, our hands are tied on putting a limit on those, but it is part of our strategy to have all three parts. The constitutional amendment that allows us to have limits, the limits, and then having more disclosure and transparency with the dark money.
On the disclosure, are they causing actual people's names to be listed? Because
sometimes like if it was Phil Knight, his name was top to the top, but often it's a corporation. The best example is down in Richmond, California, where Chevron was trying to buy the city city councilors, and all Chevron's candidates lost because every time the ads came out, it was paid for by Chevron, and the voters said, no, thank you. So that's the greatest example of a tagline success. But today we have no limits and no disclosure and no taglines. So any amount, we're 49th in the country, Mayor Gamba.
I know.
So any limits, even if we raise it to the federal limits, is going to be better than Phil Knight donating $3 million.
Right. No, I completely agree. I'm not in any way pushing back on it. I just, I think.
Yeah, and to be honest, this is not the end of the fight. This is going to be a constant, because it's like whack-a-mole or plug a dam. It's going to be a constant battle to tighten it up and make it more transparent.
Well, we would love to help publicize anytime the citizens need to get involved in pushing this stuff through. So keep us in the loop, and we'll have you back on, especially when we hit the critical points in the Oregon legislature. Is there anything you'd like to close with, Patrick?
No, just follow us on Facebook. I'm also on Facebook. I post frequently there. That's an easy one. I also post on Twitter. But if you want to sign up for those reports, which are more in depth than Facebook and Twitter, of course, because there's more than 140 characters. Keep up. And I'll send you, Larry and John and Betsy, updates of especially action items immediately when boots on the ground to pass this. And
if I can be of any help, I would be happy to as well.
Thanks, Mayor.
There's a question from Jeffrey Pearson about how are the federal limits determined?
I don't know the history. The mayor may know more, and I didn't know it got updated to 2,800. That's good news.
Yeah, I actually don't know when and how those were established either.
I don't know if they go back to Watergate. A lot of reforms happened after Nixon had the duffel bags of cash. That's when Common Cause was born, and other NGOs that are, good government NGOs, because that's when people were like, what? So, and it actually goes way back. Oregon's history is 1908 is when we had some of the strongest campaign finance laws, because the Oregon system and the initiative and referendum, the people would start these initiative and referendums outside of Salem or outside of the capital and the governor. Montana's another good example where the people just had to do it because, to be honest, if Salem fails to do it this session, which that could happen, we're going to pivot and get behind honest elections ballot measure. They're gathering signatures as we speak. And Mayor Gamba is probably aware of that.
Yeah.
That's a group that was successful not only in Multnomah County with 89% passing that, but also Portland City in 2018, 87% in favor of campaign finance reform.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those issues that is really, truly bipartisan. I don't think there's anybody out there that thinks it, besides the millionaires, that thinks it's a good idea for there to be unlimited money in these races.
Yeah. Betsy, was there any further comments or questions on the line?
No other questions.
I'll try to research the history of that for your listener. What was his name again?
Jeffrey Pearson.
Jeffrey Pearson. Yeah, I'll try to find out the timeline on the federal limits, and especially with Mayor Gamba's new information about them that may have just passed that they. The other thing I want to close with is how cool Oregon is. I mean, we're 49th in a lot of things, but we do have this cool thing where you get a $50 credit in your taxes if you donate $50 or less. Because in a way, and it's up to $12 million every year that comes out of the coffers. In a way, that's public financing. And a lot of people don't know that they can donate $50 to Mayor Gamba's campaign, and it's a complete refund on your taxes. So my personal goals are two goals: better voter turnout and more small donors. And this system of the $50 credit, which I think should be raised to $100 in Salem, is so powerful if everyone takes advantage of that. Even for school board races or city council races, it applies to all the races in Oregon.
I agree. It was interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she had donated $50 or a little bit more to several campaigns that she was interested in, and then came to find out that $50 only covered one of those, not all of them. Right. She was shocked, but that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. So good luck, Mayor Gamba, and thanks so much, Larry and Betsy and John.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll be in touch.
The Dal's at a family thing, so I'm going back to the family.
Okay. Tell everyone hi for us.
Good day. Thanks.
Mayor Gamba, welcome.
Thank you. That was fascinating.
I remember the first time I saw you, and it was at a state central committee meeting, and you got up to the microphone to speak on one of the resolutions that was being discussed. And it was kind of like a breakout moment. It was like an Obama breakout moment. It's like, whoa, there's someone articulate who's advocating and taking a position on something. So it was a great first introduction.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's been fun. I never imagined that I would be part of the party itself for years. I've actually had issues with both parties for a lot of years, mostly because it's become such a corporate controlled body on both ends. But the new sort of left swing of the Democratic Party actually seems to be getting us back to what I always used to believe that the Democratic Party was about. So it's been fun to be involved in that sort of quiet mini revolution inside the party.
Or not so quiet. Well, the next slide shows your district. And as we were discussing earlier, it's a very interesting shape. John, could we show the map of CD5? So, we're getting to the end of the 10-year cycle, and we'll be taking a census next year. And then once the census is taken, they will have an opportunity to rebalance the populations within each of the congressional districts. And we think that Oregon is going to finally get its 6th congressional district, because the population has been increasing here, and people have been moving here from other states. And so someone's going to lose a seat, but we'll probably gain one. But your district is very interesting. So you've got a big swath of the coast. You start just below CD1, south of Cannon Beach, and then it goes all the way down to Yachats.
Right.
And then there's part of it that is very, very thin. And then there's this arm that goes off to the east and sucks up a bunch of population areas, including Salem. And so you have just a wide mix of everyone in your district.
Yes, I've got everything from loggers to fishermen to, industry in Clackamas County. And then just a lot of good, hardworking folks in that area. It's kind of a salt of the earth district, which makes me happy. A lot of people are concerned that it's too purple a district for me, but I don't actually believe that. I believe that I represent working people rather than the large corporate moneyed interests. So I think it's kind of a perfect district for me.
And before the current occupant, it was represented by Darlene Hooley, who was awesome and by no stretch of the imagination purple or red.
Correct. Yeah.
So,
yes.
that's a misconception that's a purple district. And as we learned with Bernie Sanders, if you can talk about issues in the right way, there are many issues that transcend party affiliation, and that it is really for everyone. And I think that is your belief system and value system as well.
It is. I think I think you're right. I to a large degree, I think the sort of red-blue divide is somewhat manufactured by media, because a lot of the issues that Americans face, the regular working folks, whatever you want to call them, the 99%, they have more issues in common than they do that they're opposed to. When you can sit down and talk with somebody over coffee or a beer or something, the things that concern them are the welfare of their family, and can they keep them healthy, and can they get their kids a good education, and can they get to work without sitting in traffic for a long time. And those are the day-to-day basic concerns that most people have, and the sort of hot button issues that have been to some degree manufactured or whipped up to create this red-blue divide are very second-tier issues in many cases. I think climate, sadly, is one that has become one of those hot-button issues that still mystifies me, because the farmers and the fishermen are going to be some of the first and hardest hit people when climate change really starts to get bad. So they would, in a logical world where they weren't being fed a bunch of BS, they would be on the front lines of the climate fight.
So tell us about your background. You're currently the mayor of Milwaukee.
I am. I was just reelected for my second term as mayor. I've been on the council now 6 years. I was on the planning commission before that, and I helped start the art committee in Milwaukee before that. So I've been involved with the city for many years now. I also serve on a number of regional bodies. I serve on what they call MPAC, the Metropolitan Policy Advisory Committee. I serve on the Clackamas Coordinating Committee. And I'm working currently on the what they're calling T2020, which is the transportation task force to determine how to really take the transportation system for the Portland metro region to the next level and start to really solve some of the problems we face.
But does that include the interstate bridge?
Right now, that is not. So we are excluding the federal. So the interstates are actually federal pieces of infrastructure. Sadly, the federal government has largely walked away from taking responsibility for those. We're seeing, parts of interstates crumbling. We're seeing certainly parts of interstates that haven't changed to keep up with the population densities of areas, but those are federal properties. We're looking at everything besides those, although we are looking in some of those corridors as to how we could maybe improve transit or improve bike ped infrastructure in a I-5 or 205 corridor. But so you asked me a background question, and I just launched right into what I'm currently doing. So before that, I was, or actually still am, theoretically, a commercial photographer, freelance. I had contracts with people like National Geographic, and did both editorial and advertising work for decades. So I've signed the front side of a number of paychecks over the years, and have run a small business that was very successful right up until the downturn. I'm a father. I've got 3 kids, and I don't know, background as a outdoor adventurer. That was actually a lot of the work I did for National Geographic was adventure kind of stuff, kayaking and climbing mountains and skiing and diving with sharks and things like that.
Before we went on into the recording, you were discussing with John that you had actually been seeing the effects of climate change.
Yeah, so it's been years ago now, actually. I was starting to see, or we were starting to see the coral reefs bleaching. And the first time I saw it, I thought maybe there had been some infestation or some disease or something. And I got up back on the dive boat afterwards, and there happened to be a marine biologist on board, and had a conversation, and said, no, it's that the waters are warming. And that confused me a little bit, because we were in relatively warm water. And I said, well, why are they warming, and how does that affect the coral? And she walked me through that whole process. And that was just the beginning. We were just starting to see it. Now, a huge portion of the Great Barrier Reef, which was where that was, is starting to bleach, and which will kill it. And that's actually devastating to bigger issues around fish stock. A lot of the human population on this planet uses the ocean for their main protein source, and the rearing grounds for fish are the coral reefs and the mangrove swamps around the world, both of which have been being devastated. But the other thing I saw on doing some mountain work was that the glaciers were receding. Even sea kayaking, I did a story for Sports Illustrated up in Glacier Bay. And geez, this is almost 20 years ago. And I remember paddling with the guy, and he said, well, this is where the glacier used to extend it to. And we paddled another 2 miles to get to where the glacier was at that point. And it's been a long-term trend that we're only really now starting to see the detrimental effects. I think a lot of the West is suffering from lack of water in the summer, in part due to the fact that the glaciers that used to exist in the mountains are gone or nearly gone.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like turning the Titanic. It's such a slow process, and by the time people realize that it's actually directly impacting their lives here, it could be too late to reverse course.
Yeah, well, we're told that we have 11 years by some very extensive scientific bodies that have put a lot of work into this. The reading I had done 30 years ago on this, I was beginning to be concerned that we had already passed the tipping point. And there are some scientists that think we may have. It's difficult to tell, right? The Earth is a very complex system. So it's not easy to be super precise, which is the sort of the excuse that the right has used for taking no action. I think the trends have been pretty obvious. I think the results, the final result, whether the people can argue that it's going to take 5 years or 50 years to happen, the end results are still the same, which is basically the planet becomes untenable for human life. I think that there's dramatic action needed, and now we've been given a clock. I mean, there's the majority of scientists have said, yes, you've got 11 years.
So last year during the campaigns, we talked to a number of candidates from all over the state, And it didn't matter what part of the state they were from. The top issue that everyone said that people asked about when they met with the voters was around healthcare. And so one of the problems with discussing healthcare is that we have these phrases that seem to encompass many shades of it. And so it's really important to understand what candidates support. So where are you on healthcare?
Well, in broad strokes, let's start with broad strokes. We're the only industrialized country on the planet that still does not guarantee all of its citizens health care in some form or another. There are different styles of doing that all over the place. Some are a little more successful than others, I think. And which is really crazy, we spend more on healthcare as a country than any of those countries as well, by a large margin, not by just a little bit. So we're spending substantially more, and we have millions of Americans who don't have health insurance, and millions more who may have some crappy version of health insurance with a large deductible that in essence means they're not going to be able to use their health insurance because they don't have the $10,000 to cover the deductible. So we are denying a large portion of our the people who live here. I used to say citizens, and I'm trying to train myself not to say citizens, the residents of America. We're denying a lot of them health care. And as a result, we have health outcomes that rank poorly. We rank 12th amongst the top 12 industrialized nations in health outcomes. So that's the overall big picture. I strongly believe that we should have some system that makes sure that every single person has access to healthcare. Now, let me sort of, because I was a National Geographic photographer, I actually got to experience the health care of a couple of other countries, unfortunately. And in both instances, I walked in, I was treated very well. I got the care I needed. I was given more time with a doctor than I think I ever have in the United States. And when I walked out, in both instances, I paid a paltry little sum because there was some part of each treatment that wasn't covered. In one case, it was that they gave me an extra dose of the drug. It turns out I'm allergic to fire ants. Who knew? And this drug was a solution to that, so that I could keep it with me, so that the next time I was attacked by fire ants, I'd have it. And they couldn't give me the second drug for free, right? The second dose. So that was all I paid for. And you can't imagine, for most Americans, I would say, how different it would feel to walk in to get health care and to walk out knowing that you're not going to go bankrupt, knowing that you don't have to put some huge charge on your credit card just to pay for that. It's an amazingly different feeling. And I think every American would love it if they got a chance to experience it. And then, so the question is, how do you pay for it, right? That's the question that boils back down to what system we're going to use. And the Medicare for All concept, or the more robust version of Medicare for All that I think Bernie Sanders is currently talking about, is probably the simplest way for us to get there, because we already have that infrastructure, so to speak. We already have the system in place. So it's probably going to be the easiest way for us to port over. And, maybe it's a system where you just get to opt in to Medicare. And you can keep your private insurance if you want to keep your private insurance. I don't know. I think there's a lot of people that seem to think if they lose their private insurance, they won't get as good a care. But I would beg to differ. the experience I had in Mexico and in New Zealand was that I got better care there than I've gotten here in the States. So I don't think that the private insurance is going to protect them any, but they would learn that soon enough.
Yeah, just because it's a government-run program doesn't mean it's run poorly. There's actually parts of the government that's run very, very well. And so why can't we envision a system that's run well?
Yeah.
Parts.
So when you talk to voters about this issue, how do you convey to them the importance of this, and what are your speaking points that resonate best with them?
Well, I often I'll ask them a question, something like, the last time you had to have medical care, something big, something beyond a flu shot or something. How was your experience? Did you, was it easy? Did you just go get the care you needed when you needed it and walk away and that was that? Or did you spend a whole bunch of time on the phone arguing with the insurance company about what was covered and what wasn't covered and what was your deductible and what was your copay? And, the insurance policies are so complex these days that you need a degree and a lawyer to be able to interpret them. And so a lot of people spend a lot of time arguing with healthcare or health insurance companies about what's going to be covered and what's not going to be covered. And I think that's a pretty universal experience. I have not met anybody yet who has not at some point at least experienced that. And if they've had something catastrophic, it's been a very ugly experience. I met a woman who was homeless when I met her. She had been very well off, actually. She was a commercial artist, a very successful one. She lived in the West Hills. She drove a Mercedes, I think, or a nice car. Anyway, one day on her way to an appointment, to a meeting, she got into a pretty bad car accident and had a lot of nerve damage done where she couldn't work. She couldn't actually produce the art that she lived by. And she was told by the surgeons that it was going to take a series of 7 surgeries in order to get her back to the point where she could work again. And after, I think it was 3 or 4 surgeries, the insurance company said, "You're cured, right? You're all better. We are not paying for any more of these surgeries." And she wasn't. She still couldn't work. She still couldn't produce art. So she sold her house and her car, moved in with a friend, got a couple more of the surgeries. And this, of course, those surgeries are always months and months and months apart. So eventually she became homeless. I think the surgeon actually completed the last surgery on his own dime, which is awesome, but not, I don't think, a commonplace experience. But he took care of her, and she is now working again, and I believe she's housed again. But she was literally living on the street for a while, all due to the insurance company cutting her off. And she had really good insurance, really good insurance that she believed would completely cover her. So, there are way too many experiences out there like that. That are not the case if you happen to live in England or France or Canada or virtually any place else.
Wow. What else would you like to share with our viewers on your values and what you will be advocating when you get elected?
Well, I think the campaign finance reform conversation we just had has to be in, like I said, the top 5 issues that we address. Without it, we're going to continue to have the situation where politicians are more concerned with what their funders think or care about than they are with the outcome for their constituents, for the average person. And that's, I've found it clear down at the at the city level, there are so many rules and regulations and single phrases in code that hinge on whether it's harder for someone who is low income or a person of color or in any other way disadvantaged than it is for those who are not. And it is baked into our system across the board in every single thing. And it gets baked that way because, whichever corporation it was that wrote you that $10,000 check, they say, well, we like what you're doing here. It's a good idea. But if you just change this one line here, right here, just this one to read this way, it would mean the world to us. It really would fix some problems that's going to cause us and it really won't affect the way the bill functions, which of course is an absolute lie. And that they can afford to hire some of the best and brightest to do that work. So that's the dynamic, I think, that we have at all levels of government to some degree. And most and worst at the federal level. So until we get to the point where our election process is about choosing who has the best vision, who has the best policy chops, who is thoughtful and can work with other people, those are the things we should be measuring when we're electing people, not how much money can they raise. And that's right now literally how we are choosing people, because if you can't raise enough money to get in front of the folks that are too busy in their lives to put a lot of effort into researching, you're not going to win the election. Kurt right now has $2.5 million in the bank. He's raising money. I am told that even to be competitive, I have to raise $1.5 million.
And how many millions do you have now?
I have 0 millions right now. I think we've raised just shy of $10,000 to this point, because I'm not taking corporate money. I'm not taking any corporate PAC money, which cuts. I have people who are good companies who are on the right side of the fight. There's a solar company here in the Portland metro region that I've worked with on a number of projects because they have a nonprofit wing where they go and they will put up a solar array once a year, on some needy. So they've done hospitals down in Central America. They've done orphanages. They've put solar arrays up on a lot of really deserving places. So they're a great company, right? We're aligned. There's nothing they would ever want from me that would be destructive to everyday people. And yet they can't give me money because I'm not taking corporate money.
Well, can I jump in there, because I also think you said you signed the No Fossil Fuels pledge right off the bat, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I was one of the first politicians in the state to do that. Somebody said recently I needed to do it again because it's a different race. But I think when I did it, they had us all fill out this little piece of paper and then take a picture of ourselves saying, with our signature saying, and mine said, "Not now, not ever." So I thought I was done with that, but
we just need
apparently I need to do it again.
We just need to circulate it around, but
okay,
and get that back and going. On the corporate money though, and this is I just want to talk to you about this because I've heard the same thing about fossil fuel labor, and I believe you are taking labor PAC money. So all of those people though, the individuals in the solar business, the solar company, could give you money in different ways. They could distribute that money out to their employees. They could find a way to get, there's other ways they could work with you without it being a corporate represent. You know what I mean? So they're not bound, right?
No, it affects taxes. There's if they can just write it off, it's a straight up write off, right? If they're,
I get it.
It gets really complicated for them, and when you're a small business like the solar guys, they don't have the fancy accountants to figure out how to game the system and donate anyway. So it's not that big of a deal, but I've actually had to walk away from 2 maximum donations because they needed to give it to me from their corporate account.
Oh, that sucks.
Betsy, did we have any questions from the line?
Well, Dennis from Germany actually pointed out that he pays 7% out of his income as part of my taxes, only out of pocket expenses for medicine, which are affordable, and pay €10 a day for hospital stay. So actually, we have somebody listening who lives under a different medical system. It wasn't a question, but he did have a question about, do you agree if Democrats focus only on Trump, they will lose further in the future?
If they focus only, I think the Democrats should be focusing on the issues. The Democrats should be focusing on the things that are affecting the American people right now, and that will affect the American people in the not so distant future. Here's my take on Trump. He was a result of a electorate that is frustrated and angry, and by good reason. They should be frustrated and angry. If you track over the last 50 years, if you track the cost of housing, the true cost of living, wages, and particularly if you can take wages and pull out executive wages out of those numbers and make that its own separate line, you will see that the American people, the 99%, whatever you want to call it, have been getting poorer year over year for 50 years. And I'll give you a kind of a concrete example. When I was a kid, one parent could stay home. One parent could work just a job. It didn't have to be lawyer, doctor kind of job, just pretty much any decent job. And they could afford to buy a house. They could afford to buy a car. They could afford to pay for whatever medical expenses they had. They could go on vacation every now and then, God forbid. Today, if a family doesn't have 2 pretty significant incomes, they are not buying a house, certainly not in the Portland metro region. So by that measure, Americans have gotten twice as poor or half as wealthy, however you want to measure it, in 50 years. And people are feeling that. What is the problem is that they're being lied to about why that is, right? In many instances. Bernie was one of the first presidential candidates, at least, that ever actually told them the truth about why they are poorer than they used to be. Trump was blaming it on the Muslims and blaming it on the Mexicans. And so there was this backlash, and I think it was a backlash against the status quo, because the status quo is what got us here. The status quo is why people's lives are the way they are. And there were enough people out there that were just saying, I'm willing to blow up the system. I'm willing to, just as long as it's not a status quo politician. I firmly believe that had the Democratic Party nominated Bernie Sanders, that would be the president right now. Because I actually knew Republicans that were willing to vote for Bernie, but weren't willing to vote for Hillary, who hated Trump nearly as badly as many of us do.
I just want to jump in on that.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry, I just say thank you for saying what you said. I appreciate that very much. And I want to ask you about that. You're a photographer. You've worked with, obviously, with professional media organizations. Where do you find the responsibility of media in this? because there's no accountability in mainstream media right now. They lie blatantly. All of them do. And now we have a confusion with Trump calling out fake news. But we know that not all of it is fake. So what would you do if elected to maybe put some, integrity back into media?
That's an outstanding question. And I've actually thought a lot about that, because I agree with you. I think, again, you go back 50 years and you look at what news organizations were like.
Yes.
And you remember some of those, Walter Cronkite and
Murrow.
Some of those old school journalists that actually told people the truth as near as they could find out, right? They did the journalistic work. And now you have newspapers dying on a daily basis. And the ones that aren't dying are the ones that are by and large sold out to some large corporate entity that then has their own message that they want to spin. So even if somebody does a decent journalistic article, if you are a journalist and you're used to looking at this stuff, you will see the places where something was tweaked slightly or left out, or there was a line added or a phrase used to sort of cause people to take a slightly different message from the article that was presented, rather than honest to God journalists. This will probably get me in all kinds of hot water, but when I decided I was going to announce, I knew that eventually somebody would do an article on me. I wanted it to be as straightforward journalistic version as possible, as well researched as I could get, so that people got a realistic picture of who I was. I don't want to sell some lie about who I am, right, and have, try and buy votes that way. I want them to know what they're getting. So I reached out to the place that I have been seeing consistently the most hard-hitting, well-researched, long-form journalism, and that's Street Roots. They have some journalists there, and they have a ownership mechanism that does not spin.
So you reached out to an organization that you felt was going to make sure they dug into your who you are and told the truth regardless of what they found.
Exactly, because I actually believe in journalism.
Amazing.
I believe that it is, in many ways, it is the sort of fourth leg of the American democracy. Sure. If you don't have good journalism, you don't have people learning the truth, right? And if they don't know the truth, how they vote for Congress, how they vote for president, all of those things are based on what? Some PR that somebody wanted to ram down your throat. So I am a strong believer in journalism. It's why I went into the career I went into. I actually wanted to be a National Geographic photographer when I was, 14 years old.
That's cool. It's a cool job. Very fun. Looks cool. Although fire ants, I wouldn't want to deal with fire ants. So some bummers.
Yeah, it was interesting. I puffed up like the marshmallow Stay Fresh pop, whatever.
Okay, yeah, nice.
It was pretty bad. But that's definitely not the scariest thing that's ever happened to me.
No. So with climate change and just tying it in, I mean, the media is kind of responsible for the 30 years of doing nothing and pushing climate change denial. And you are, you've witnessed it. Your Twitter cover is a picture of, and is this Colorado? Because I grew up in Colorado, and that's pretty much Colorado right now.
No, you're thinking of the fracking fields, and they're not quite this bad. This is actually Southern California. This is called Oildale. Is the name of the town.
I know Oildale. That's near Bakersfield. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a cliff up above all that big oil field, and it was perfect for a shot that just showed nothing but oil derricks.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's beautiful. Do you agree with in climate justice that if we can eventually make these changes, sounds like we have to do a lot of campaign finance reform. We have to tackle climate change. We really don't even have 10 years left because it's been a couple, and new reports say it's going even faster. But would you work to what would you do? Do you think the fairness doctrine should be reinstated? Because a lot of people say that didn't even work. Do you think that would help with media? I know it's a tough one.
It is. It's a complicated thing. I actually, if you want to know my honest opinion about how we fix media, is it can't be owned by someone.
Yeah, 6 corporations, right? Yeah.
So it's got to be almost a branch of government where these are the people whose job it is to go out independently with, they can't have anybody telling them what to do other than their marching orders, which is go find the truth. Right. But in this day and age with everything being about money, I don't know how you do that. It would be hard.
You cut the military budget.
There's got to be some mechanism by which we can get back to getting real journalism again.
Yeah, well, and so my last question, Larry, and then I'll get it back to you, because I really would like to interview you on We the People, which is another show that we do in the evening. We interview if you'd be willing to come on that, because I'd like to. That'd be phenomenal. I really appreciate you running against Kurt Schrader, because as you said on K2, he votes with Republican or for Republican policies. He doesn't even pay attention to climate change, and so it seems like that's kind of the top of your priority there. So I appreciate that.
It is. It's odd to me that it's not the top of everybody's priority.
Yeah, me too.
You would think the survival of the species would somehow rise to the top of everyone's concern, but it's not. The stock market and last week's sports game and whatever is more important.
Yeah.
So, Mayor Gamba, how can we shovel our small donations to you?
MarkGamba.com is the only thing up on it right now. Is just there you go. That's the page. Where I'm still trying to, we had some issues getting that launched, technical issues. That's what happens when you have a tiny little team. We are working on backfill, getting some more content back behind that. But right now you can donate, and that's the portal through which to do it.
That's amazing. $1.5 million to compete. Remember, everybody, we're pretty early in the game here, so you've got plenty of time to get policies up. And it looks like you can also volunteer for the campaign as well through there.
Yes, I believe that we'll have the doors. I think that the grassroots is behind me. I think that all of the people, all the Democrats who are paying attention to the issues, all of the issues, recognize that Kurt is not representing them on at least 70% of them, which is a pretty poor score for somebody who calls himself a Democrat.
No, oil and gas, insurance, forestry, pharmaceuticals, and health professionals are his top 5 industries.
Right.
He's not helping the 99%.
No, and that means he's not going to be for Medicare for all or anything that remotely looks like that. He's not going to be for any kind of adjustments to the way we utilize our timber. I actually think we can put more guys back in the woods making good family wage jobs by solving the problem. Yes. Right? By starting to utilize that resource in a sustainable method. It's the mechanization of that industry that has cost all the jobs, not everybody's like the spotted owl. It wasn't the spotted owl. There's almost as much wood coming out of the private forest right now as there were before the spotted owl, right? The difference is they have these large machines that do most of the work, and so the guys are out of a job. But if we were to start harvesting in a sustainable method, it would require more people back in the woods, and then more people helping maintain and begin to return our forests to something closer to their aboriginal state, which would be a lot healthier, would sequester more carbon, would make them more resilient to the coming changes that we're going to see already baked into the system from climate change.
So to clarify, we need to plant more trees and stop clear cutting. Would you agree with those two things?
Yeah, that's right there. That's some two good starts. I think we need to plant a more variety of trees too. I grew up in Western Colorado, and I can remember when there was a beetle that came through and wiped out the blue spruce, and that was predominant tree in those forests. And so we had vast acreage of dead trees, which led, of course, to some catastrophic forest fires that killed a bunch of firefighters. If we don't have a variety of trees in the forest like there were 200 years ago, we are at risk for a new pest that hasn't been able to live here because it was too cold. As the climate warms, there may be pests that migrate, and we could end up wiping out the forest. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the forest industry. There's a lot of work in agriculture. If we would stop subsidizing the wrong kind of farming and stop subsidizing the right kind of farming, we could actually, that's a big solution towards climate change. That's a big piece. But we use our money stupidly in this country. We subsidize the oil, coal, and gas industries, and then the people trying to do the right thing, the renewable energy sector, has a pittance in comparison. So I think just straight up with tax policy and policy around subsidies, we could begin to shift the climate issues.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thank you, Mark. We've come to the end of the time. That was a great interview. We really appreciate you taking out time this morning to talk to us.
Happy to do it. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to work with all of you, Larry and Betsy and John. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll talk more. I really appreciate you running, and I'm going to volunteer for your campaign. I'd like to help you out. And to everybody out there watching the show that's in Oregon or not, donate. Kurt Schrader is one of the people that's stopping us from moving forward. And he's a Republican. We don't need him there. So, thank you. All you, Larry.
Just a couple of wrap-up things that are going on. We're establishing a grievance process for the Democratic Party of Oregon. There has been some egregious things that have happened over the past couple of years, for sure, since 2016, and they've not been addressed. So what we have done is that we have established a reporting process. So if you go to pdpo.org, there is a button where you can click and say report harassment and abuse. And this includes all the forms of harassment, not just sexual harassment. So if you are being yelled at, if you are being lied to, if someone is commanding you to do things within the party for which they have no authority, these are the kinds of things that drive people away and make the party weak. And the only way that this party can eventually succeed and reclaim its position in this country is if we all work together. So we're going to do our part in Oregon. This is the beginning. We will be establishing a more formal process within the Democratic Party of Oregon, and Multnomah County itself is establishing its own process so we can start behaving in a more professional manner and treating everyone with respect. Next slide. Today at 2:00, we're going to be talking about recalls and removals. It's called When the Romance is Over, and this is what you do inside of deliberative assemblies when you find yourself being led by someone who is inappropriate. So there's a couple of ways to find this. Probably the easiest way is go to advancementofdemocracy.org. And if you look at the videos tab, the upper right-hand corner will be a link to today's program. And forever after, that's where it will be. So you can always watch the recorded version later if you need to refer to any of the material. BernieSanders.com kickoff. John, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. And I thought we were going to do the Robert's Rules live, because why not?
We are going to do it live at 2 o'clock, and then it'll be recorded.
Oh, okay, good. All right, sorry. Yeah, so BernieSanders.com/kickoff is what was all about yesterday. Go there, look at the page, download the app.BernieSanders.com, and do this. That's what yesterday was about. So you can watch the video, which is exciting, or you can just go do this for Bernie. Thank you.
Next slide. So starting in May, we are going to have a program called Parliamentary Talk. This is like the equivalent of Card Talk or Philosophy Talk if you're into the really nerdy part of NPR. I will be having guests come on. We are soliciting people's problems that they've been having, like with your homeowners association or with your neighborhood association or any kind of democratically run organization that allegedly follows rules. We can help you solve conundrums. You find that many people are motivated to learn this stuff because they've been in a situation where they've had the rules used against them instead of enabling them, and that's what we want to do. So you can submit your question that you'd like us to talk about on air. You can also subscribe to notices of the programs. And if you'd like to actually start studying parliamentary procedure, you can join our virtual study group, and we will get you connected up with meetings where we talk about the issues and the subject matter, and we can get you accredited. If you are supporting Bernie Sanders for president, we have the website OregonForBernie.org. We would love to have you sign up, even if you're just interested in notices. What we need is a statewide network for organizing to make sure that he is successful in Oregon. We post a weekly Bernie update, so you can go out and see the latest video and what's been happening around the state. Lots of stuff, lots of activity around the state in organizing and having events and networking. And then we would like to collect your information to make sure that you are involved in the activities that come up. We're currently working on a statewide bumper sticker, and so there will be another poll out later today. So don't go there yet, go later today, and we would love your feedback on it because we'd like to get these into production. Also on advancement of democracy, excuse me, we are working on some proposed bylaws changes for the Democratic National Committee. If you have ideas on how to make the party better, we would like to hear them. We will be working on these up and through next year and try to get them accepted by the Democratic National Committee one way or another. And finally, if you want to receive notices of these shows, you can sign up there also at advancementofdemocracy.org. And we will send you previews of what the subject matter is in case you would like to join us. And finally, your donations will be greatly appreciated. We're going to be doing some live stream broadcasts later this year, and we need to raise a couple of $1,000s for infrastructure. If all of us contribute to that, we can make it happen. You can do that at donate.uphillmedia.org. We would greatly appreciate your contribution. And that's our show for today, John.
It is. Thank you, Larry. That was wonderful. And when Larry says we need to raise a couple thousand, it's because the solo is dead. We did a test yesterday, and it just didn't work. And it doesn't matter if we have the modems with the IPs. That poor thing has been beat up since 2015, and it's dead. So that would be why. So there'll be no more remote live streaming through the solo until we can get a new solo, which is expensive, unfortunately.
But not that expensive. It's not like $1 million.
No, it's a couple grand, which to the 99% is like $1 million. But no, just kidding. Thank you, Mark Gamba, for being on. Really appreciate it. That was awesome. I'm going to celebrate your challenging Kurt Schrader with a very Oregon, very Portland video. This was captured by somebody. This is downtown Portland on the Willamette, and they were so excited. I believe for spring is what this was, but it's unique. So it's not a song, but this is how happy I am that Kurt Schrader has a progressive challenger. All right? So
okay.
Please help him out. Thank you, everybody.